The first light of dawn crept across the dusty Wyoming horizon as Hazel Scott clutched the worn letter in her trembling hands, her unseeing eyes fixed ahead. The stagecoach rattled beneath her, each jolt sending waves of anxiety through her slender frame as she journeyed toward a man she had never met, a husband waiting in a place she would never see. But Montana, 1878. That was her destination, where Thomas Lawson awaited his mail-order bride. They had exchanged letters for 6 months, but Hazel had carefully omitted one crucial detail. She had been blind since birth. Her aunt had written the letters for her, helping craft responses to the lonely cattle rancher seeking companionship in the rugged Montana territory. "Last stop coming up, miss," the driver called back, his gruff voice penetrating her thoughts. "Butt station in about 10 minutes. Hazel nodded, clutching her small carpet bag closer. At 22, she had lived a sheltered life in Boston with her aunt following her parents' deaths. When her aunt passed away 3 months ago, Hazel had been left with few options. Becoming a mail-order bride seemed the only path forward, though she feared what would happen when Thomas Lawson discovered her blindness. The stagecoach rolled to a stop, dust billowing around the wheels. Hazel heard the driver climb down, then the door swung open. "Need a hand, miss?" he asked, his voice softer now. "Please," she replied, extending her hand cautiously. As she descended from the coach, the sounds and smells of butt overwhelmed her senses: horses nickering, men calling to one another, the sharp tang of dust and leather, and somewhere nearby, the clang of metal on metal from what must be a blacksmith shop. "Miss Scott." A deep voice addressed her from a few paces away. It was rich and warm, with the slight drawl she had come to associate with Westerners through her limited encounters on the journey. "Mr. Lawson?" she asked, turning toward the voice, her white-knuckled grip on her bag betraying her nervousness. "Yes, madam." His boots crunched on the gravel as he approached. "Welcome to Butt." There was a pause, and Hazel knew he was looking at her, studying her face, perhaps noticing how her gaze didn't quite meet his. She took a deep breath. "Mr. Lawson, before we proceed any further, there's something I should have told you in my letters." Her voice wavered slightly. "I'm blind. I have been since birth. I understand if this changes things." The silence that followed seemed eternal. Hazel braced herself for anger, rejection, perhaps even abandonment right there at the stagecoach stop. "I see," he finally said, his voice revealing nothing of his thoughts. Hazel's heart sank. "I'll understand if you wish to dissolve our arrangement," she said quietly. "I can try to find passage back east." "Miss Scott," Thomas said, his voice closer now, "I made a promise to you in those letters, and I'm not a man who breaks his word." She felt a gentle touch on her arm, steadying her. "May I?" he asked. When she nodded, confused by his request, he took her hands in his calloused, strong hands that spoke of years of hard work. With infinite gentleness, he guided her hands to his face. "I figure if you're to be my wife, you ought to know what I look like," he said softly. Hazel's fingertips trembled as they met the warm skin of his face. She traced the strong line of his jaw, feeling the slight stubble there. Her fingers moved higher, discovering high cheekbones, a straight nose that had been broken once and healed slightly crooked. His brow was broad, his hairline beginning to recede slightly, though he couldn't be more than 30. Most striking were the laugh lines at the corners of his eyes, evidence of a man who smiled often. "Thank you," she whispered, withdrawing her hands, a blush warming her cheeks. "The ranch is about an hour's ride from town," Thomas explained, placing her bag in his wagon. "I've got a room ready for you at the house. We can discuss, well, everything else once you're settled." He helped her into the wagon with careful hands, making sure she was securely seated before climbing up beside her. As they pulled away from the station, Hazel realized that whatever lay ahead, Thomas Lawson was a man of uncommon kindness. Perhaps there was hope for their arrangement after all. The wagon jostled along the rough trail leading out of Butte, each bump and dip causing Hazel to grip the wooden seat more tightly. The sounds of town gradually faded, replaced by the rhythm of hooves and the creak of wagon wheels. She could smell sage and dust, and the air grew cooler as the afternoon progressed. "It's mostly open range we're passing through now," Thomas said, breaking the silence that had stretched between them. "My property starts about 3 miles ahead, marked by a creek that runs year-round. It's not the biggest spread in the territory, but it's good land, 200 acres, most of it pasture for the cattle." Hazel nodded, appreciating his attempt to help her visualize what she couldn't see. "How many cattle do you have?" she asked. "About 80 head now. Started with just 20 when I claimed the land 5 years back." Pride colored his voice. "Got a small vegetable garden near the house too, and a few chickens for eggs." "It sounds lovely," she said, genuinely meaning it. "It's not much compared to Boston, I reckon." Boston was. She searched for the right words. Boston was crowded, too many people, too much noise. I always felt lost there, even with my aunt's help. Thomas was quiet for a moment. "Miss Scott, Hazel, please," she interrupted. "If we're to be married, perhaps we should use our given names." "Hazel," he corrected himself, the name sounding pleasant in his deep voice. "I want you to know that our arrangement, it doesn't have to proceed if you're uncomfortable. I can help you find a position in town, perhaps as a teacher's assistant at the school." She turned toward him, surprised by his consideration. "Are you rescinding your proposal, Mr. Lawson?" "Thomas," he reminded her. "And no, I'm not. I'm giving you a choice. I don't want you feeling trapped." Hazel considered his words. The truth was, she had few options. But more than that, something about Thomas Lawson, his gentle guidance of her hands, his straightforward manner made her want to honor their agreement. "I'd like to try," she said finally. "If you're willing to be patient with me, I'm capable of many things despite my blindness. My aunt made sure I could cook, clean, and manage a household. I just need to learn the layout of your home." The relief in his voice was evident. "I'm glad to hear it. And yes, I'll be patient." They fell into easier conversation after that. With Thomas describing the landscape, they passed through stands of pine trees, a meandering creek where deer often drank at dusk, distant mountains that changed color with the light. "We're coming up on the ranch now," he said about an hour later. "You can probably smell the smoke from the chimney. Mrs. Abernathy, my neighbor's widow, comes by 3 times a week to help with cooking. She's there now, getting supper ready for us." Hazel indeed caught the scent of wood smoke, along with something savory that made her realize how hungry she was after the long journey. The wagon slowed, then turned. The ground beneath the wheels changed from hard, packed dirt to something softer grass, she guessed. Finally, they came to a stop. "Here we are," Thomas announced, "the Double L Ranch." Before he could climb down to help her, a door creaked open and footsteps hurried toward them. "Mr. Lawson, you're back earlier than I expected." The woman's voice was warm and motherly with a slight Irish lilt. "Mrs. Abernathy, I'd like you to meet Miss Hazel Scott," Thomas said, jumping down from the wagon. "My, intended. Oh my." The woman sounded delighted. "Welcome, child. What a pleasure to finally meet you. Mr. Lawson has been talking of nothing else for weeks." Hazel smiled in the direction of the voice as Thomas helped her down from the wagon. "It's lovely to meet you too, Mrs. Abernathy." There was a brief pause, and Hazel sensed the older woman had noticed her unfocused gaze. "Miss Scott is blind," Thomas explained quietly. "She'll need a bit of help learning her way around." To Mrs. Abernathy's credit, she didn't miss a beat. "Well then, dear, You just take my arm and I'll show you around the house. I've made a pot roast for supper that'll put meat on those bones. You must be exhausted from your journey." Grateful for the woman's matter-of-fact acceptance, Hazel took the offered arm. As they walked toward the house, she counted steps, noting the 3 stairs up to what must be a porch, the slight squeak of the second board, the way the door hinges groaned softly. The house smelled of pine, leather, and cooking food, a masculine space softened by the aromas of home. Mrs. Abernathy guided her through the main room, describing it as they went. "The fireplace is on your right, with 2 chairs facing it. Straight ahead is the kitchen table, oak and solid as they come. The kitchen proper is beyond that. There's a hallway to the left with 3 doors, Mr. Lawson's bedroom at the end, which I suppose will be yours too once you're wed." The woman lowered her voice. "But for now, the middle room is made up for you. The first door is the washroom." Thomas's boots sounded on the porch, and then he entered with Hazel's bag. "I'll put this in your room," he said, his footsteps receding down the hallway Mrs. Abernathy had described. "He's a good man, Mrs. Abernathy said softly. "Lost his parents to cholera back in '69, came west with nothing but determination, built all this himself." "Thank you for telling me," Hazel replied, equally quiet. Thomas returned, and they sat down to the promised pot roast with carrots and potatoes that Mrs. Abernathy proudly announced came from Thomas's own garden. The meal passed pleasantly, with Mrs. Abernathy filling most silences with cheerful chatter about town gossip and the coming harvest festival. After dinner, the older woman insisted on washing up alone. "You two have plenty to discuss," she said, shooing them toward the sitting area. When they were settled in the chairs by the fireplace, Thomas cleared his throat. "I thought perhaps we might. That is, there's a preacher who comes through town every other Sunday. He'll be here this weekend. If you're agreeable, we could be married then." Hazel's heart quickened. It was happening so fast, yet in many ways this was exactly what she had agreed to in those letters. "Yes," she said. "That would be fine." "Good," Thomas replied, sounding relieved. "I've been thinking about what you said, about learning the layout of the house. Tomorrow I'll take you around the property, help you get familiar with everything." "I'd appreciate that." They talked a while longer, Thomas explaining his daily routine, the rhythms of ranch life. Mrs. Abernathy eventually bid them good night, promising to return the next afternoon. Thomas showed Hazel to her room, patiently guiding her hands to the furniture: a bed, a chest of drawers, a small table with a wash basin. "There's a hook behind the door for your clothes," he said. "And I put a bell on the kitchen table. If you need anything during the night, just ring it." His consideration touched her. "Thank you, Thomas." He hesitated at the doorway. "Good night, Hazel." "Good night." After he left, closing the door softly behind him, Hazel sat on the edge of the bed. She was exhausted, yet her mind whirled with impressions of the day, the smell of leather and horses that clung to Thomas's clothes, the gentle way he had guided her hands to his face, the solid feel of the home he had built. For the first time since her aunt's death, Hazel felt something like hope unfurling within her. Morning came with the crow of a rooster and the distant lowing of cattle. Hazel awoke disoriented, then remembered where she was. Carefully, she got up and dressed, taking time to explore her room more thoroughly by touch. When she felt ready, she opened the door and followed the hallway, counting steps, one hand trailing along the rough-hewn wall. She smelled coffee before she reached the kitchen. "Good morning," she called softly. "Mornin'," Thomas replied, his voice coming from near the stove. "Hope I didn't wake you. Coffee's hot if you'd like some." "Yes, please." She moved cautiously toward his voice. "Table's about 5 steps ahead of you," he said. "Chair on the near side." She found it without trouble and sat down. A moment later, she heard him place a cup in front of her. She reached for it carefully, her fingers finding the warm ceramic. "Sleep well?" he asked. "Very, thank you. Your house is comfortable. It's not much, but it serves." There was a slight pause. "I thought we might start with the house this morning, get you familiar with where everything is. Then after lunch, I could show you around the yard, the chicken coop, the garden." Hazel nodded. "That sounds perfect." Thomas proved to be a patient teacher. He walked her through each room multiple times, describing furniture placement and potential hazards. He placed her hands on door frames, window latches, the pump handle at the kitchen sink. By mid-morning, she could navigate from her bedroom to the kitchen and sitting area confidently. "You're a quick learner," he commented as they took a break for more coffee. "I've had practice," she replied with a small smile. "When you can't see, you learn to create maps in your mind." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "Can I ask, have you always been blind?" "Yes, since birth. The doctor said something went wrong as I was developing." She sipped her coffee. "I don't know any different, so it doesn't trouble me as much as people think it should." "I admit, I was surprised yesterday," he said carefully. "But not disappointed if you were worried about that." Hazel felt warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the coffee. "Thank you for saying so." After lunch sandwiches Thomas prepared with surprising skill, he took her outside. The late September air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and distant snow from the mountains. He guided her around the yard, showing her the well, the woodpile, the path to the outhouse. Each location he marked with a distinct feature she could identify by touch: a rope hanging by the well, a smooth stone beside the path to the outhouse. At the chicken coop, he placed an egg in her hand, still warm from being laid. In the garden, he knelt with her to feel the different plants, explaining what each was. His hand occasionally brushed against hers as he guided her, and each time Hazel felt a curious flutter in her stomach. "The barn's over there," he said, pointing, then catching himself. "About 30 paces north of the house. We can save that for tomorrow if you're getting tired." "I'm fine," she assured him. "I'd like to see to visit the barn." He offered his arm and she took it, noticing how solid he felt beneath her touch. The ground changed from packed dirt to straw and sawdust as they entered the barn. The smells intensified: hay, horses, leather. "Watch your step here," he warned, guiding her over what felt like a slight dip in the floor. "I keep meaning to fix that." A soft nickering came from nearby. "That's Pepper," Thomas explained. "My mare. Would you like to meet her?" When Hazel nodded, he led her to a stall. "She's gentle as they come. Here, hold your hand flat." He guided her hand to the horse's nose. Pepper's breath was warm against her palm, then soft velvety lips tickled her skin as the horse investigated her scent. "She likes you," Thomas said, and Hazel could hear the smile in his voice. "I like her too," Hazel replied, stroking the horse's nose. "I've never been this close to a horse before. In Boston, I only heard them passing on the streets. Never ridden." "No, never. I could teach you if you'd like. Pepper's steady enough." The offer surprised her. "You think I could learn to ride?" "I don't see why not. Plenty of things I reckon you can do that might surprise folks who underestimate you." His confidence in her abilities, something she'd rarely encountered outside her aunt's home, touched Hazel deeply. "I'd like that," she said softly. They spent another hour in the barn, with Thomas showing her the saddles and tack, explaining their care, letting her feel the different textures and shapes. By the time they returned to the house, the sun was lowering toward the horizon, the air growing cooler. Mrs. Abernathy had arrived while they were out and was bustling around the kitchen, humming as she worked. "There you are," she called. "I was wondering where you'd gotten to. Supper will be ready in about half an hour." "Thank you, Mrs. Abernathy," Thomas said. "We were just exploring the property." Well, come warm yourselves. It's getting chilly out there. She bustled over to Hazel, taking her hand. Come sit by the fire, dear. You look flushed from the wind. As Hazel settled by the fireplace, she realized she was smiling. For a day that had started with so much uncertainty, it had unfolded into something unexpected, a glimpse of what her life here might actually be like. Thomas Lawson was proving to be a man of surprising depth and consideration, far more than the rough cowboy she had imagined from his letters. The next several days fell into a rhythm. Each morning, Thomas would help Hazel practice moving around the house and yard until her confidence grew. In the afternoons, he would show her some aspect of ranch life: how to gather eggs without disturbing the hens, how to tell when vegetables were ripe by their smell and feel, how to card wool from the few sheep he kept for winter clothing. On Thursday, true to his word, he gave her her first riding lesson. With infinite patience, he helped her mount Pepper, then led the horse around the corral at a walk, teaching Hazel how to feel the horse's movements, how to balance in the saddle. "You're a natural," he told her when they finished, his voice warm with approval. By Friday, Hazel had memorized most of the house and immediate yard. She could prepare simple meals in the kitchen, though Mrs. Abernathy still insisted on handling most of the cooking. Thomas had crafted markers for her notches in door frames, small bells on certain doors, different textures on important objects to help her navigate independently. That evening, as they sat by the fire after Mrs. Abernathy had left, Thomas cleared his throat. "Preacher Williams will be arriving tomorrow afternoon. The wedding would be Sunday after services, if that still suits you." Hazel's heart quickened. "Yes, that's fine. I've arranged for Mrs. Abernathy to help you prepare. She mentioned something about a dress she could alter for you." "That's very thoughtful." A silence stretched between them, comfortable yet charged with unspoken thoughts. "Hazel," Thomas finally said, his voice low, "I want you to know that I don't expect, that is, marriage brings certain—" He sighed, clearly struggling. "What I mean to say is that I'll not rush you into anything you're not ready for." Understanding his meaning, Hazel felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'm glad you came," he said simply. "These past days, they've been good." She smiled, turning toward the warmth of his voice. "They have been, haven't they?" Another silence fell, this one sweeter than before. For the first time, Hazel allowed herself to think that perhaps this arranged marriage might become something more than mere convenience for both of them. Saturday dawned clear and cool. Mrs. Abernathy arrived early, burdened with packages and chattering excitedly about wedding preparations. She shooed Thomas out to his chores, then spread her treasures on the kitchen table for Hazel to feel: a dress of soft cotton with lace trim, a pair of satin slippers, a length of ribbon for her hair. "It was my daughter's," she explained as Hazel's fingers explored the dress. "She wore it when she married and moved to Oregon. I've been saving it, and with just a few alterations it should fit you beautifully." "It's lovely," Hazel said, touched by the woman's generosity. "But I couldn't possibly—" "Nonsense," Mrs. Abernathy interrupted firmly. "What else would I do with it? Better it should bring joy to another bride than sit in a trunk gathering dust." They spent the morning altering the dress, with Mrs. Abernathy guiding Hazel's hands to show her where she was placing stitches, explaining each change she made. It was the most detailed sewing lesson Hazel had ever received, and she appreciated the older woman's willingness to teach rather than simply do for her. By midday, the dress was ready. Mrs. Abernathy insisted Hazel try it on, making a few final adjustments to ensure the perfect fit. "You look beautiful," she declared when they were finished. "Thomas won't know what hit him." Hazel blushed at the thought. Do you think he's pleased with our arrangement?" she asked hesitantly, Mrs. Abernathy's hands stilled their work. "Oh, my dear. I've known Thomas Lawson for 5 years, ever since he came to Butt. I've never seen him as content as he's been these past days with you here. He watches you when you're not aware, with such tenderness in his eyes." The words sent a flutter through Hazel's chest. "Truly, truly." The older woman patted her hand. "He's a good man who's been alone too long, and if you don't mind my saying so, I think you're exactly what he needs." Later that afternoon, while Mrs. Abernathy was preparing supper, the sound of an approaching wagon caught Hazel's attention. Thomas, who had been mending a saddle by the fire, set his work aside. "That'll be Preacher Williams," he said, rising. "He usually stays in the spare room when he comes through." "But that's my room now," Hazel realized, suddenly concerned. "Don't worry, I've fixed up a cot in my office for him. It's small, but he won't mind." The door opened, bringing a gust of cool air and the sound of hearty male laughter. "Thomas Lawson, you old trail dog," a booming voice exclaimed. "Mrs. Abernathy told me the news when I stopped at her place. Getting married, are you? About time." "Preacher Williams," Thomas greeted him, his voice warm with friendship. "Come in and meet my intended, Miss Hazel Scott." Hazel rose from her seat, smoothing her skirts nervously. "Miss Scott," the preacher said, his voice softening as he approached her, "it's a pleasure to meet you. I understand you've come quite a distance to join our little community." "Yes, from Boston," she replied, extending her hand. "Well now," he said, taking her hand in a gentle grip, "Boston's loss is certainly Butt's gain. And Thomas here is the luckiest man in the territory, if you don't mind my saying so." Thomas cleared his throat, and Hazel imagined he might be blushing. "Supper should be ready soon, preacher. Let me show you where you'll be staying." As the men's footsteps receded down the hallway, Hazel found herself smiling. Preacher Williams' warm welcome had eased some of her nervousness about the following day. Perhaps, just perhaps, this new life wouldn't be so daunting after all. Supper that evening was a lively affair, with Preacher Williams regaling them with tales from his circuit around the Montana Territory. He had a gift for storytelling that made Hazel laugh more than she had in months. Thomas was quieter, but she could hear the smile in his voice when he occasionally contributed to the conversation. After Mrs. Abernathy departed with a promise to return early the next morning, the three of them sat by the fire drinking coffee. The preacher's tone grew more serious. "Now, I usually spend some time counseling couples before I join them in matrimony," he said. "But Mrs. Abernathy tells me you two have already had your courtship by letter." "That's right," Thomas confirmed, "though Hazel has only been here a week." The preacher's chair creaked as he leaned forward. "Marriage is a sacred undertaking, especially out here where life demands partnership in all things. Have you discussed your expectations of each other?" Hazel felt heat rise in her cheeks at the direct question. Beside her, Thomas shifted in his seat. "We've been getting acquainted," he said carefully, "learning to work together." "Good, good." The preacher's voice was kind. "Miss Scott, if I may ask, are you entering this union of your own free will, with no reservations?" The question deserved honest consideration. A week ago, Hazel might have admitted to significant doubts. But now, "I am," she said firmly. "Thomas has been nothing but kind and considerate. I believe we can build a good life together." "Thomas," the preacher prompted. "Yes," he replied, his deep voice steady. "I made a promise in those letters, and I mean to honor it, but more than that." He paused, and Hazel sensed him looking at her. "More than that, I've found that Hazel brings something to this house that's been missing, a kind of light." The simple words, spoken with such sincerity, touched something deep within her. She reached out instinctively, her hand finding his on the armrest between them. His fingers curled around hers, warm and secure. "Well then," Preacher Williams said, satisfaction evident in his voice. "I believe the good Lord has brought you together for a purpose. We'll make it official tomorrow after services." Later, when the house had quieted and Hazel lay in her bed listening to the distant howl of a coyote, she reflected on Thomas's words. A kind of light. The notion that she, who had never seen light, could bring it to someone else's life was a revelation, one that filled her with both wonder and trepidation about the day to come. Sunday morning dawned with a flurry of activity. Mrs. Abernathy arrived shortly after breakfast, shooing the men out of the house so she could help Hazel prepare. She filled a basin with heated water scented with lavender, then helped Hazel wash and arrange her hair, weaving a ribbon through the long chestnut tresses. "There," she said when they had finished dressing Hazel in the altered wedding gown, "if only you could see yourself. You look absolutely lovely." Hazel ran her hands down the soft fabric of the dress, feeling the delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. "Thank you for everything, Mrs. Abernathy. You've been so kind." "Pish," the older woman said, though Hazel could hear the emotion in her voice. "It's been my pleasure, truly. Now let's not keep those gentlemen waiting any longer." The small but church was packed for Sunday services, word having spread that Thomas Lawson was marrying his mail-order bride. Hazel could sense the crowd's curiosity as Mrs. Abernathy led her to a pew near the front. Whispers followed them, but the older woman squeezed her arm reassuringly. "Pay them no mind," she whispered. "They're just surprised to see Thomas finally settling down." The service passed in a blur of hymns and scripture readings. Hazel, raised in the church by her aunt, found comfort in the familiar rhythms of worship. When Preacher Williams announced that there would be a wedding immediately following the service, an excited murmur rippled through the congregation. As the regular worshipers filed out, a smaller group remained those closest to Thomas. Mrs. Abernathy explained, who had been invited to witness the ceremony. Hazel heard Thomas's boots on the wooden floor as he approached and took her hand. "You look beautiful," he said softly, his voice slightly awed. "Thank you," she replied, wishing desperately that she could see his face in this moment. He seemed to sense her thought. Taking her hand, he guided it to his cheek, just as he had that first day at the stagecoach stop. "I'm wearing my Sunday best," he told her with a slight chuckle. "Mrs. Abernathy made sure my hair was combed proper." His face was freshly shaved, she discovered, the strong planes of his features now familiar beneath her fingertips. When she reached his mouth, she felt it curved in a smile. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded, her heart racing. The ceremony itself was simple and brief. They stood before Preacher Williams, who spoke of duty, partnership, and the sacred bond of matrimony. When it came time for Thomas to place the ring on her finger, a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother, he explained in a whisper. His hands were steady. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Preacher Williams declared. "Thomas, you may kiss your bride." There was a moment of hesitation, then Thomas's hands gently cradled her face. His lips found hers in a kiss that was soft and brief, yet held a promise that made Hazel's pulse quicken. Afterward, there was a small celebration at the ranch. Neighbors and friends Thomas had invited brought food and good wishes. Mrs. Abernathy orchestrated everything, making sure Hazel always knew who was speaking to her and where furniture had been placed. Through it all, Thomas remained close by, his presence a steadying anchor as she navigated the unfamiliar social waters. By late afternoon, the last of the guests were departing. Mrs. Abernathy, despite Hazel's insistence that she had done more than enough, stayed to help clean up. "I'll just get these dishes washed, then I'll be on my way," she said firmly. A bride shouldn't have to scrub pots on her wedding day. When she finally left, extracting a promise that they would come to dinner at her home the following Sunday. An unfamiliar silence settled over the house. Hazel stood in the middle of the sitting room, suddenly acutely aware that she and Thomas were truly alone for the first time as husband and wife. "Would you like some coffee?" Thomas offered, his voice slightly strained. "Yes, thank you," she replied, grateful for the mundane suggestion. She listened to him move about the kitchen, the familiar sounds already comforting after just a week. When he returned, he pressed a warm cup into her hands, then settled in the chair opposite hers. "Well, Mrs. Lawson," he said, a smile in his voice. "Welcome home." The use of her new name sent a pleasant shiver through her. "Thank you, Mr. Lawson," she replied with equal warmth. They sat in companionable silence for a while, sipping their coffee as the day faded toward evening. Finally, Thomas cleared his throat. "Hazel, about tonight." He began, then faltered. "Yes," she prompted. When he didn't continue, he sighed. "What I said before still holds true. I don't expect anything you're not ready for. If you'd prefer to keep your room for now, I'll understand." His consideration touched her deeply, but in truth, Hazel had been thinking about this moment since their engagement became real. In Boston, her aunt had explained the physical aspects of marriage to her with practical frankness. Hazel was nervous, certainly, but not afraid, not with Thomas. "I am your wife now," she said softly, "in all ways." There was a sharp intake of breath, then the sound of his cup being set down. "Are you sure?" Instead of answering, she rose from her chair and held out her hand. After a moment's hesitation, he took it, standing to face her. "I'm sure," she whispered. His bedroom, their bedroom now, was at the end of the hallway. Thomas led her there slowly, as if giving her every opportunity to change her mind. Inside, he lit a lamp, though it made no difference to her darkness. I'll give you a moment," he said, his voice husky. "There's a nightdress Mrs. Abernathy left on the bed for you." When the door closed behind him, Hazel moved carefully to the bed, her hands finding the soft cotton nightgown. She changed slowly, folding her wedding dress with care. Then she sat on the edge of the bed, heart hammering in her chest. A gentle knock preceded Thomas's return. "May I come in?" "Yes," she called softly. The door opened and closed. His footsteps crossed to the other side of the bed. She heard the rustle of clothing, the creak of the bed as he sat down to remove his boots. "I've banked the fire in the main room," he said, his voice strangely formal, "and locked the front door." "Thank you," she replied, equally formal. Another silence fell, thick with anticipation and uncertainty. "Hazel," he finally said, moving around the bed to stand before her. Would you let me see you, all of you?" The request surprised her, but she understood its significance. She stood, nodding her consent. With gentle hands, he untied the ribbon at her throat that secured the nightgown. As the fabric slipped from her shoulders, cool air kissed her skin, raising goosebumps. She resisted the urge to cover herself, instead standing still as she sensed him looking at her. "You're beautiful," he whispered, reverence in his voice. Then he took her hands, guiding them to his chest. "Now you," he said, "see me." Her fingers encountered warm skin and the crisp hair of his chest. Slowly she explored him: broad shoulders, strong arms, the flat plane of his stomach. Each discovery increased her wonder at this man who was now her husband. When her exploration was complete, he drew her against him, skin to skin. His lips found hers in a kiss deeper than the one they had shared in the church, filled with a hunger that awakened an answering need within her. "I never expected this," he murmured against her ear as he lifted her onto the bed. "When I sent away for a bride, I never imagined I'd find." "What?" she prompted when he trailed off. His hand caressed her cheek. "Someone who would make me feel whole again." That night, Thomas guided her with the same gentle patience he had shown in teaching her the paths around their home. There was discomfort, yes, but also discoveries that left her breathless and clinging to him. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the darkness that for once they both shared, Hazel felt a sense of rightness that transcended all her earlier fears. "Thomas," she whispered, unsure if he was still awake. He tightened his arm around her. "Thank you for guiding my hands that first day, for letting me see you." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Thank you for being brave enough to come." As she drifted toward sleep, Hazel realized that in this man's arms, in this house that was becoming her home, she had found a belonging she had never known was possible. The weeks that followed their wedding settled into a rhythm of domestic life that suited them both. Thomas continued to help Hazel master the layout of the ranch, proudly watching as she grew more confident in her movements. True to his word, he taught her to ride Pepper, first in the corral, then on short trails around the property. Hazel proved to be an excellent horsewoman, her acute senses allowing her to feel the horse's movements in a way that made up for her lack of sight. October brought cooler weather and preparations for winter. Thomas spent long days mending fences and outbuildings, ensuring everything would withstand the harsh Montana winter ahead. Hazel took over more of the household duties from Mrs. Abernathy, learning to cook on the temperamental, would stove and preserve the last harvests from the garden. Their evenings were spent by the fire, sometimes in companionable silence, sometimes in conversation that lasted deep into the night. Thomas would read to her from his small collection of books, mostly practical manuals on ranching and animal husbandry, but also a few classics his mother had treasured. Hazel, in turn, shared stories of her childhood in Boston, of the aunt who had raised her with firm but loving guidance. And each night, they discovered more about each other in the privacy of their bedroom, their physical connection deepening alongside their emotional one. One crisp November morning, as they sat at breakfast, Thomas cleared his throat. "I've been thinking," he said, a note of hesitation in his voice. "Winter's coming on fast. I need to make a trip into Butt today for supplies, flour, coffee, ammunition, that sort of thing. Would you like to come along?" Hazel paused with her coffee cup halfway to her lips. She hadn't left the ranch since their wedding, the familiar environment giving her a security she hadn't wanted to risk. But the idea of accompanying Thomas, of being a true partner in all aspects of their life together, appealed strongly. "Yes," she decided, "I'd like that very much." His pleasure was evident in his voice. "Good, we'll take the wagon. It'll be a bit bumpy, but we can bring back more that way." 2 hours later they were on the road to Butt, bundled against the morning chill. Thomas described the changing landscape as they traveled, pointing out landmarks she might recognize by sound or smell the creek crossing. The stand of aspens whose leaves rustled distinctively in the breeze. The rocky outcrop where eagles sometimes nested. As they approached town, the sounds of civilization reached Hazel's ears, hammering from the blacksmith's forge, children's voices from what must be the schoolyard, the general hum of conversation and commerce. "Main Street's up ahead," Thomas told her. "We'll stop at Jensen's General Store first. Mr. Jensen's a good sort, fair prices, and he doesn't water down his goods like some might." The wagon rolled to a stop, and Thomas jumped down, coming around to help Hazel descend. She took his arm, counting steps as they walked into the store. A bell jingled above the door as they entered. The rich smells of the general store enveloped her: coffee beans, leather, tobacco, spices, all mingling in a distinctive perfume of commerce. "Thomas Lawson," a hearty voice called out, "and this must be the Mrs. Abernathy's told us all about your bride, but she didn't mention how pretty she was." "Mr. Jensen," Thomas greeted the storekeeper. Yes, this is my wife, Hazel. Hazel, this is Olaf Jensen, who runs the finest establishment in Butt. You flatter me, Lawson, Mr. Jensen chuckled. A pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Lawson. Welcome to our little community. Thank you, Hazel replied, smiling in the direction of the voice. It's nice to meet you, too. There was a brief pause, and Hazel knew the moment when Mr. Jensen realized she was blind. To his credit, he recovered quickly. Well now, what can I get for you folks today? Just got in some fine calico from back east that might interest you, Mrs. Lawson. As Thomas began listing the supplies they needed, Hazel felt someone watching her. A moment later, a female voice spoke from nearby. Mrs. Lawson. I'm Sarah Peterson, the schoolteacher. I just wanted to introduce myself. Hello, Miss Peterson, Hazel replied, turning toward the woman's voice. It's nice to meet you. I was wondering, Miss Peterson continued, her voice brightening, if you might be interested in visiting the school sometime. We have a little library, and I've been looking for someone to read to the younger children occasionally. Mrs. Abernathy mentioned you have a beautiful reading voice. Hazel blinked in surprise. But I can't see the books. Oh, Miss Peterson sounded embarrassed. I'm sorry I didn't explain properly. We have several books in Braille, a donation from a benefactor in Helena. Do you read Braille, Mrs. Lawson? A surge of excitement coursed through Hazel. Yes, I do. My aunt taught me when I was a girl. Wonderful. Then perhaps you'd consider my invitation. The children would be thrilled, and honestly, it would be such a help to me. Before Hazel could respond, Thomas's hand touched her elbow. That sounds like an excellent idea, he said, warmth in his voice. Hazel's been looking for ways to become more involved in the community. His support, freely given without hesitation or concern about how her blindness might be perceived, filled Hazel with gratitude. I'd love to, she told Miss Peterson. Perhaps after the new year when the weather allows easier travel. Perfect, the teacher replied, clearly pleased. I'll look forward to it. The rest of their visit to town passed in a whirl of introductions and conversations. News of their arrival had spread quickly, and it seemed everyone in Butt wanted to meet Thomas Lawson's new wife. Throughout it all, Thomas stayed close, his steady presence giving Hazel the confidence to navigate this new social terrain. By the time they loaded their supplies and headed home in the late afternoon, Hazel was exhausted but exhilarated. You were wonderful, Thomas told her as they left town behind. Everyone was impressed by you. Do you really think so? She asked. I was so nervous. Couldn't tell it, he assured her. You carried yourself like you'd been living in Butt your whole life. It helped having you there, she admitted. You make me feel capable. His hand found hers on the wagon seat, squeezing gently. You are capable, Hazel. More than most folks with two good eyes. There was a pause, then he added softly, I'm proud to have you as my wife. The sincerity in his voice warmed her more than the heavy blanket he had tucked around them. For perhaps the first time since arriving in Montana, Hazel felt truly at home not just in the physical space of the ranch, but in her role as Thomas Lawson's wife, as a member of this frontier community. Winter descended on Butt with a vengeance in early December. Heavy snows and howling winds kept them mostly housebound, the days marked by the routine tasks of survival, keeping the fire stoked, caring for the animals in the barn, preparing simple meals from their stored provisions. Yet even in the harsh conditions, Hazel found unexpected joy. The long evenings by the fire with Thomas, their conversations ranging from practical ranch matters to philosophical discussions about life and faith. The comfortable silences as he worked on mending harnesses while she knitted, her fingers deftly creating scarves and socks for them both. The nights in their shared bed, when they found warmth in each other that defied the bitter cold outside. Christmas approached, bringing with it a thoughtfulness that Hazel hadn't anticipated. What could she possibly give Thomas that would express what he had come to mean to her? The answer came one afternoon, as she was sorting through the small trunk of possessions she had brought from Boston. Her fingers encountered a small leather pouch near the bottom, her mother's locket, the one possession of her parents she had kept. Opening it, she ran her finger over the delicate engraving she knew was there, a pattern of intertwined roses. That evening, after Thomas had gone to check on the livestock one final time before bed, Hazel carefully wrapped the locket in a handkerchief and tucked it under his pillow. Christmas Eve brought a break in the weather, clear skies and brilliant stars Thomas described to her as they stood on the porch after supper. "Wish you could see them," he said softly. "The whole sky's alive with light." "Describe them to me," she requested, leaning against him. He did his best, his words painting pictures in her mind of silver points scattered across black velvet, of the Milky Way stretching like a river of light from horizon to horizon. "My aunt used to tell me that stars are holes in the floor of heaven," Hazel said when he finished. "That the light of God's presence shines through them to remind us we're never truly in darkness." Thomas's arm tightened around her. "I like that idea." When they retired to bed, Thomas discovered her gift as he turned down the covers. "What's this?" he asked, unwrapping the handkerchief. "It was my mother's," Hazel explained. "The only thing I have from her. I wanted you to have it, not to wear, obviously, but perhaps to keep with your mother's ring, a joining of our families." There was a long silence, then the sound of Thomas setting the locket carefully on the bedside table. When he gathered her into his arms, she felt wetness on his cheeks. "Thank you," he whispered hoarsely. "It's the most precious gift anyone's ever given me." In the morning, Thomas insisted Hazel sit by the fire while he disappeared outside for nearly half an hour. When he returned, stomping snow from his boots, there was an air of suppressed excitement about him. "Merry Christmas, Hazel," he said, approaching her chair. "I have something for you." She heard him set something on the floor beside her, something that gave a curious little squeak. "What?" she began, then gasped as a warm, wriggling body was placed in her lap. "A puppy," Thomas explained, his voice betraying his pleasure at her surprise. "A border collie. Old Man Taylor's dog had a litter in October. This one's the smartest of the bunch, already half-trained to herd sheep. But more than that, I thought she might be trained as a guide dog for you." Hazel's hands explored the puppy's soft fur, floppy ears, a cold nose that immediately began investigating her face with enthusiastic licks. "I've read about such dogs," she said wonderingly. "In Europe, they train them to help the blind, but I never thought. Taylor's wife has a cousin in Denver who trains dogs for all sorts of work," Thomas explained. "She says this pup has the right temperament. With proper training, she could help you navigate beyond the ranch, even into town on your own." The thoughtfulness of the gift, not just the puppy itself, but the independence it promised, overwhelmed Hazel. "Oh, Thomas," she whispered, tears springing to her eyes. "She's perfect." "What shall we call her?" "That's for you to decide," he replied, settling on the floor beside her chair, one hand gently stroking the puppy's head. Hazel considered for a moment, her fingers continuing to explore the small, warm body in her lap. "How about Stella?" she suggested. "It means star in Latin. For Christmas, and for those stars you described to me last night." "Stella," Thomas repeated. "I like it." As winter gradually yielded to spring, Stella grew from a roly-poly puppy into a sleek young dog with an uncanny intelligence. True to Thomas's hopes, she showed a natural aptitude for guide work, quickly learning to walk at Hazel's left side, to stop at steps and obstacles, to find specific locations on command. With Stella's help, Hazel's world expanded. She could now walk the paths around the ranch on her own, visit the chicken coop to gather eggs, even make her way to the barn to bring Thomas lunch when he was working there. In late March, when the worst of the snow had melted and the roads were passable again, Thomas suggested they make good on Hazel's promise to visit the school. "Miss Peterson asked about you when I was in town last week," he told her. "Said the children are eager to meet you and Stella." So on a bright Tuesday morning, Thomas drove them into Butte. Stella sat proudly between them on the wagon seat, her training collar gleaming in the spring sunshine. At the small schoolhouse, Miss Peterson welcomed them warmly, introducing Hazel to her 24 pupils ranging from 6 to 16 years of age. "Mrs. Lawson is going to read us a special story today," she explained to the children. "And she's brought her clever dog Stella to show you." The children's excited whispers filled the room as Hazel was seated in a chair at the front. Miss Peterson placed a Braille volume in her hands. "The Adventures of Tom Sawyer," she explained. As Hazel's fingers moved across the raised dots, translating them into words she spoke aloud, a hush fell over the classroom. She read with expression and warmth, occasionally pausing to explain a reference the younger children might not understand. Thomas stood at the back of the room, and though she couldn't see him, Hazel could feel his pride radiating toward her. After the reading, the children had dozens of questions about Braille, about how Hazel managed everyday tasks, and especially about Stella, who endured their attention with dignified patience. "Will you come back next week, Mrs. Lawson?" one small girl asked as they prepared to leave. Hazel smiled in the direction of the child's voice. "If Miss Peterson would like me to, I'd be happy to." "We would all like that very much," the teacher assured her, and so began another chapter in Hazel's new life. Each Tuesday, weather permitting, Thomas would drive her into town for her reading session at the school. Sometimes he would stay, watching from the back of the room with undisguised pride. Other times he would use the opportunity to conduct business in town, returning to collect her afterward. Spring blossomed into summer, the ranch coming alive with new growth and activity. Thomas was busy from dawn to dusk with cattle and crops, often returning to the house exhausted but satisfied with the day's work. One evening in late July, as they sat on the porch enjoying the cooler air after a scorching day, Thomas took Hazel's hand in his. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice carrying an undercurrent of excitement. "The ranch is doing well this year, better than I expected. I've been putting aside some money and I think we could make some improvements to the house." "What kind of improvements?" Hazel asked, curious about his enthusiasm. "For starters, an indoor pump so you don't have to go outside for water. Maybe a proper bathtub instead of that tin monstrosity we've been using, and I was thinking we might add another room." "Another room? Whatever for?" There was a pause, then Thomas's voice came softer, almost hesitant. "Well, I thought, that is, I hoped we might need it, for a nursery." Hazel's heart skipped a beat. They hadn't explicitly discussed children, though the natural conclusion to their marital relations made the possibility ever present. "A nursery," she repeated, a smile spreading across her face. "Yes, I think that would be a wonderful improvement." Thomas's arm slid around her shoulders, drawing her close. "So you'd like that, to start a family?" "Very much," she assured him, resting her head against his chest. "Though we may need that nursery sooner than your building plans allow." She felt him go very still. "Hazel, are you saying?" "Dr. Morgan confirmed it when we were in town yesterday," she said, unable to keep the joy from her voice any longer. "We're going to have a baby, Thomas. In January, he thinks." Thomas's whoop of delight startled Stella, who had been dozing at their feet. In the next moment, Hazel found herself lifted from her chair and spun in a circle, her husband's laughter ringing in the evening air. "A baby," he kept saying, his voice filled with wonder. "Our baby." Later that night, as they lay in bed discussing names and plans, Thomas's hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach, Hazel marveled at the journey that had brought her here. From the frightened young woman who had stepped off a stagecoach in but less than a year ago, to this, a beloved wife, a respected member of the community, soon to be a mother. "Are you happy, Hazel?" Thomas asked softly, his lips brushing her temple. "Truly happy here with me?" She turned in his arms, her hands finding his face in the darkness, tracing the features that had become as familiar to her as her own. "I never knew it was possible to be this happy," she whispered. "When I first agreed to become your mail-order bride, I was desperate and afraid. I never imagined I would find this, a true home, a true love." His arms tightened around her. "When I first saw you at that stagecoach stop, something told me you were special. Even before I knew you were blind, there was a grace about you, a strength that called to me." "And you didn't run when you found out the truth," she said, still somewhat amazed by that fact. "You stayed. You guided my hands to your face." "Best decision I ever made," he murmured against her hair. As summer waned, and autumn painted the landscape in colors Hazel could only imagine, her body began to change with the growing life within her. Thomas was endlessly solicitous, insisting on taking over more of her chores, fretting if she seemed tired, his hands constantly seeking the gentle swell of her belly. "You're going to spoil me," she protested one evening as he insisted on rubbing her aching feet while she sat by the fire. "That's my plan," he agreed cheerfully. "Get used to it, Mrs. Lawson." November brought the first snows and the completion of the nursery addition to their home. Thomas had worked tirelessly, enlisting help from neighbors when needed, determined to finish before winter set in fully. He described each detail to Hazel, the sunny window. "For when the baby is old enough to look outside," he explained. The sturdy pine cradle he had crafted himself, the rocking chair positioned perfectly for nursing. "It's beautiful," she told him after exploring the room with her hands, mapping each feature in her mind. "Our baby will love it." Christmas came and went quietly, with a small celebration that included Mrs. Abernathy and Preacher Williams. They exchanged modest gifts: warm socks Hazel had knitted, a new pipe for Thomas, sweets and preserves from Mrs. Abernathy, and sang carols around the fireplace. As the new year dawned, Hazel's time drew near. Dr. Morgan began visiting weekly, his buggy making the journey from Butte regardless of the weather. Thomas grew increasingly nervous, checking and rechecking their preparations, reading and rereading the medical manual he had ordered from Denver. "Everything will be fine," Hazel assured him one night as they lay in bed, his hand resting on her now enormous belly as their child kicked vigorously. "Women have been doing this since the beginning of time." "I know," he sighed. "I just can't bear the thought of anything happening to you." "Either of you." She found his face in the darkness, pulling him down for a kiss. "We're stronger than you think, Thomas Lawson, both of us." 2 days later, in the pre-dawn hours of a bitter January morning, Hazel's labor began. Thomas, who had scarcely slept in weeks, leapt into action, stoking the fire, heating water, sending one of his ranch hands racing toward town to fetch Dr. Morgan. The labor progressed swiftly, more quickly than anyone had anticipated. By the time the doctor arrived, bundled against the cold and stomping snow from his boots, Hazel was already feeling the urge to push. "Well now," Dr. Morgan said after examining her, "this little one seems determined to join us without delay. You're doing fine, Mrs. Lawson. Everything looks exactly as it should." Thomas stayed by her side throughout, wiping her brow with a cool cloth, supporting her back when she needed to change positions, murmuring encouragement when the pain threatened to overwhelm her. As the winter sun reached its zenith, painting the snow-covered landscape in brilliant white, Hazel gave a final, tremendous push, and their child entered the world with a lusty cry. "A boy," Dr. Morgan announced triumphantly. "A fine, healthy son." Thomas's sob of joy mingled with the baby's cries as the doctor placed the swaddled infant in Hazel's eager arms. Her hands trembled as they explored her son's tiny features, the button nose, the rosebud mouth, the surprisingly thick shock of hair. "He's perfect," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Oh, Thomas, he's perfect." "Just like his mother," Thomas replied, his voice choked with emotion. His finger traced the baby's cheek with infinite tenderness. "What shall we call him?" They had discussed names at length but had never quite decided. Now, holding their son, Hazel knew. "William," she said softly, "after your father, William Thomas Lawson." "William," Thomas repeated, testing the name. "Little Will, it suits him." In the days that followed, they settled into a new rhythm centered around their son's needs. Thomas proved to be a natural father, as comfortable changing diapers as he was handling newborn calves. Stella appointed herself the baby's guardian, stationing herself beside the cradle whenever Will slept, alert to his smallest sound. Visitors came bearing gifts and good wishes. Mrs. Abernathy with a beautifully knitted blanket, Miss Peterson with a children's book of nursery rhymes, Mr. Jensen with a silver cup engraved with the baby's name and birth date. Each commented on the baby's striking blue eyes, just like his daddy's, Mrs. Abernathy declared. Winter gradually loosened its grip on Butt, giving way to the tentative greening of spring. As the land reawakened, young Will grew and thrived, his personality beginning to emerge curious, good-natured, with a laugh that never failed to brighten the darkest day. On a mild April afternoon, as they sat on the porch with Will dozing in Hazel's arms, Thomas broached a subject that had been on his mind. "I've been thinking about the future," he said, his voice thoughtful. "About Will's education and maybe siblings for him someday." Hazel smiled, her hand gently patting the baby's back. "I'd like that. A house full of children." "I was also thinking about the ranch. It's doing well, but I want to build something that will last, something to leave to our children." "What did you have in mind?" she asked, curious about the note of determination in his voice. "Expansion," he replied. "There's land adjacent to ours, good grazing land. Old man Harper's looking to sell and move to California. If we bought it, we could double our herd, maybe branch into sheep as well." "That sounds ambitious," Hazel commented, intrigued by his vision. "It is," he admitted. "But I've been saving, and the bank in Butt might extend a loan based on our current success. It would mean more work initially, probably hiring another hand or two, but in the long run it would secure our future," she finished for him. "Will's future and any brothers or sisters he might have." "Exactly." Relief colored his voice as if he had been uncertain of her reaction. "So you think it's a good idea?" "I think it's an excellent idea," she assured him. "The Thomas Lawson I married isn't a man to think small. That's one of the things I love about you." He moved to sit beside her on the porch swing, his arms sliding around her shoulders. "And what are the other things?" he asked, a smile in his voice. "Well," she pretended to consider. "There's your cooking, terrible," he interjected with a laugh. "Your patience," she continued. "Your kindness. The way you see me, really see me, not just my blindness. The way you've helped me build a life here I never thought possible." His lips brushed her temple. "I think you've got that backward, Hazel Lawson. You're the one who brought possibility into my life. Before you came, I was just existing. Now I'm living." As if sensing the moment, Baby will stirred in her arms, making the little hiccuping sound that always preceded his waking. Hazel adjusted him against her shoulder, inhaling the sweet scent of his head. "We've been blessed," she said softly. "Beyond measure," Thomas agreed, his hand coming up to stroke their son's downy hair. In that moment, sitting on the porch of the home they had built together, not just the physical structure, but the family, the love, the shared dreams, Hazel knew with absolute certainty that her journey had led her exactly where she was meant to be. 5 years later, the Double L Ranch had indeed expanded, just as Thomas had envisioned. The additional land had been purchased, the herd increased, a small flock of sheep added to their operations. The original house had been enlarged again, with a proper kitchen, a second bedroom for 2-year-old Mary, their daughter, and even indoor plumbing that Thomas had installed with considerable pride. Will, now 5, was the spitting image of his father, at least according to Mrs. Abernathy and everyone else who saw him. He had inherited his mother's acute hearing, though, and her love of stories. Each night, he would climb into her lap for their reading time, his small fingers sometimes following hers across the pages of his Braille books. Mary, born in the summer of 1883, was by all accounts a spirited child with her mother's chestnut hair and her father's determined nature. She toddled after her brother constantly, eager to be included in his adventures, already showing signs of the strong-willed young woman she would become. Stella, now a dignified older dog, had been joined by a younger border collie named Rex, who showed promise as a cattle dog. Together, they patrolled the ranch boundaries and kept a watchful eye on the children. Hazel's role in the Butt community had grown as well. Her weekly reading sessions at the school had expanded to include teaching Braille to 2 visually impaired children who had moved to the area. She had also become an informal counselor to many of the town's women, her wisdom and compassion making her a trusted confidante. Thomas, approaching 40, had mellowed somewhat with fatherhood, though his ambition remained undimmed. He served on the town council now, advocating for improvements to Butt's infrastructure and educational opportunities. His ranch had become one of the most prosperous in the county, known for its quality stock and fair business practices. On a golden September afternoon, as they celebrated their 6th wedding anniversary with a family picnic by the creek that marked their property line, Thomas pulled Hazel aside while the children played under Mrs. Abernathy's watchful eye. "I have something for you," he said, pressing a small package into her hands. "Thomas, we agreed no gifts this year," she protested, though her fingers were already exploring the paper wrapping. "This one couldn't wait," he replied, a smile in his voice. Inside the package, Hazel's fingers encountered a folded document and something metal, a key. "What is this?" she asked, confused. "The deed to a small building on Main Street in Butt," Thomas explained. "And the key to its front door. It used to be Hendrick's law office before he moved to Helena." "But why?" "For your school," he said simply. "The Braille school you've been dreaming of. There's enough space for a classroom, a library, even living quarters upstairs if we ever decide to hire a full-time teacher from back east." Hazel's hands trembled as she clutched the deed. "Thomas, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll do it," he urged. "You've helped so many already, teaching in the regular school, but this could be something more, a place specifically for children like you were, children who need a different kind of education. The town council has already approved the funding for basic operations. All it needs is someone with the vision to make it real." "The vision," she repeated, laughing through sudden tears. "That's quite the choice of words, Mr. Lawson." His arms encircled her. "You know what I mean. No one sees the potential in these children like you do. No one understands what they need better." She leaned into his embrace, overwhelmed by the magnitude of his gift, not just the building itself, but his belief in her, his understanding of the dream she had barely articulated even to herself. "I love you, Thomas Lawson," she whispered against his chest. "More today than I did 6 years ago, and that's saying something." His lips found hers in a kiss that, despite the years and familiarity, still sent a thrill through her. "And I love you, Hazel Lawson, more than I have words to say." From the creek bank came the sound of Will's excited voice, calling them to see the fish he had spotted in the clear water. Mary's high-pitched laughter followed, along with Mrs. Abernathy's admonition to stay away from the edge. "We should get back to them," Hazel said reluctantly. Thomas took her hand, tucking it into the crook of his arm as they had done countless times before. "Yes," he agreed, "back to our family." As they walked toward the sounds of their children's laughter, Hazel reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment, from a frightened blind girl stepping off a stagecoach to meet a stranger, to a confident woman surrounded by love, purpose, and possibility. All because Thomas Lawson had guided her hands to feel his face that fateful day, beginning a love story that would last a lifetime.